Hello, everybody. It's Tyler with 3D Printing Basics. If you guys were interested in getting every single episode of this podcast, 3D Printing Basics, ad-free and a week early, and also getting exclusive perks such as exclusive episodes that only you can listen to and more, then subscribe on Patreon. My link will be down below. I would really appreciate it if you guys would consider supporting me. All the support I've already received has meant the world to me, so thank you guys so much. If not, no worries. Continue to consume these episodes for free, and I appreciate you listening regardless. So thank you guys very much for listening, and I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Hello, and welcome back to 3D Printing Basics. This is episode number 110, and in this week's episode, we are going to be talking about why even if you get the same brand of filament, the same type of filament, the different colors sometimes will print completely differently, because believe it or not, that is in fact the case. Just because you get PLA doesn't mean it's just PLA. The different colors actually play quite a significant part into the print settings and kind of everything that goes on there. So before we get started, I just want to say thank you guys for all the support. 110 episodes is more than I could have ever imagined with 3D Printing Basics. So it's because of you guys that I'm taking it farther than I ever thought I could. And I couldn't thank you guys enough for that. So, I appreciate everybody listening and all your support. And with that being said, let's just go ahead and jump right into today's episode. So for this episode, it's definitely something that hits close to home for me. When I was first starting out, this is definitely a tough lesson for me to learn. I was pretty much staying with one specific brand of filament. I won't say which one, even though it was a great brand. I was printing with the different colors and everything was working great. I was using black, yellow, orange, red, pretty much every color of the rainbow of their PLA, and it worked great. I had no problems. And then I specifically tried printing their white PLA filament. It was the same exact brand, the same line, the same everything. It was just white versus any of the other colors that I've tried. And this white filament was not printing correctly to save my life. And I was young into 3D printing at the time. I didn't really understand what was going on, so I didn't really know what settings I should change. I didn't know if it was a temperature problem, if it was an extrusion problem, a flow rate problem. I didn't really know what was going on, and so there wasn't too much I could do other than kind of bang my head against the wall and just keep trying it. And it wasn't until much later when I actually became friends with people who worked at this company and became pretty tied into this company because they're local to me, that they basically came to me and they said, yeah, our white PLA is a problem for everybody because of the chemical composition of the white. It makes it harder to print versus the other filaments that we have. And that was something that kind of stuck out to me. It's something that I thought would be good to make an episode about, because just because it's the same type of filament, from the same brand of filament, even from the same filament line, the different colors actually play a lot into how well your 3D printing filament is going to print. And so that is kind of what we're going to be discussing today. So obviously pigments, it's going to be what makes each color the color that it is, whether you have red pigment, white pigment, blue pigment. That's going to be what dyes the filament into the color that you're buying it from. And the pigment itself is going to change the way that the filament behaves. These pigments can affect things like heat absorption, viscosity, cooling, flow characteristics. I know specifically for this white, in my personal experience that I was having that I just talked about, the white pigment had a lot of zinc in it, and the zinc was what was making it hard to print, because the zinc actually increased the melt temperature by quite a bit. I want to say 10 or 15 degrees was the final number that we ended up coming to, and that made it super hard to print, because obviously I was printing it at the same temperature that I was printing all the other colors at, and it just wasn't working. So eventually I was able to get that figured out, and I was able to use their white, but it just goes to show that just because it's the same, it's actually different. So like I said, the pigment can change the heat absorption, the viscosity, cooling, flow characteristics. So you might have one color that prints completely fine. You might have every color besides a specific color printing fine from the same filament line like I had, but this one color just won't print right at all. And the biggest problems when you have these problems is going to be within the black or the white filaments. And the black filament, it often contains carbon-based pigments, and that is going to make things harder to print because carbon is a little bit tougher material, so it can change all of those settings. And that is why, if you are getting the same line and you're having issues, make sure you try to zero in on a black or a white filament and kind of compare the two to see if you can see anything going on there, if there's anything wrong going on there. And then you have the white filament. So the white filament, it usually contains titanium dioxide or zinc sometimes. I know in my particular case it contains zinc, but oftentimes from my research online, titanium dioxide has been kind of the chemical that has caused a lot of issues. And this can make the filament slightly thicker or slightly heavier, which can sometimes make it more difficult to print, because if it's slightly thicker, I know I've gone over extrusion widths in the past. If the printer thinks you're running a 1.75 millimeter filament and you're actually running a 1.78 or 1.79 or even a 1.8 millimeter filament, that's going to cause a lot of problems for your flow rate. It can also make it more likely to show imperfections like blobs, seams, inconsistent extrusions, and that's going to cause a lot of problems with your prints, because that is going to severely degrade the quality of the prints. And so that is why kind of the white and the black are usually going to be the biggest troublemakers when it comes to if you're having trouble with just the colors themselves. But then there's also the different types of filaments that you can have trouble with as well. So just sticking with the PLA, there's a bunch of different types of PLA. So it's the most common used material in the world, and so there's a lot of different variations of it. Particularly one that prints a lot differently is going to be silk PLA, and this is definitely another lesson that I had to learn early on in my career. Is that silk PLA has different print settings from regular PLA. Not completely different, but different enough that can make or break you getting a successful print with silk PLA and a non-successful print. And that is because the chemical or how the filament is made that gives it that silk color, it makes it thicker and it makes it a little tougher. It just changes the chemical composition. Okay, so if I look at my research here, silk PLA, it's got that glossy appearance, but because of that chemical that is used in the silk PLA, it often makes it string more and can also reduce layer adhesion, because that silkiness kind of gets in the way and prevents the material from bonding with each other. Another thing that you can have trouble with is matte PLA. So matte PLA, that's a big thing that I use in my business. I'm a big fan of the Polymaker matte black PLA. It's something that I use a ton, and that definitely has different print settings than the normal PLA, like the even from Polymaker, because matte PLA, it has a softer appearance. It can hide layer lines well, but it may be more brittle, and that's definitely something that I've noticed in my hundreds of hours printing with this matte black PLA, is that it is much more brittle. Especially when it's on the roll, which can cause it to break when it's going through PTFE lines or getting fed through the AMS system on one of my Bamboo machines. So that's definitely something to look for if you're printing some matte PLA or just matte filament in general. It usually might be a little bit more brittle, so it could break off inside your printer, which, as we know, is not a whole lot of fun to try and fix. So that is definitely something to consider there. Then you also have the glitter filaments, the carbon filaments, the glow filaments, pretty much anything that has additives inside the filament itself. So with your carbon filaments, you have the chopped carbon fibers. With the glitter and the glow filaments, you have kind of those chopped up tiny pieces or fragments that give it that glitter or the glow elements. And just because it's PLA, if you're using a filament like that, it can actually wear down your nozzle, because those are treated as abrasives. If you think about it, you have a bunch of foreign objects inside the PLA filament that is going to be rubbing against the nozzle as it's coming out, and because they're tough, they're hard little bits of material, they're going to wear down that nozzle and kind of act like sandpaper. It can also mess with your flow consistency as well as your extrusion behavior. And so this is just kind of goes to show that even if you're using the same material, which is in this case PLA, all of these submaterials, they all need different print settings. You can't just run everything as generic PLA. Everything needs to be tuned, everything needs to be calculated, and it needs to be measured so that you can give yourself the best chance of having a successful print. Because I've been saying it, especially a lot in these last couple of episodes, the biggest goal of this podcast and just you knowing as much as you can about 3D printing is to give yourself the best chance of having a successful print every single time you start it up. So that is definitely going to be something that is very, very important. And another thing I just wanted to mention too with these different colors is that they can also have very different surface finishes and appearance finishes. So some colors, they're just going to naturally hide the layer lines better. Like a white PLA is generally going to be a lot better at hiding layer lines versus a black PLA, which kind of accentuates them, especially if you have little inconsistencies in there. It's going to reflect light differently and it's going to appear smoother overall. And that's just kind of something that comes with the different colors. So, you know, just because it's the same material, you're going to achieve a lot of different looks depending on which color and which finish you decide to go with. So dark matte colors, they can often look cleaner and they can look more professional, while bright glossy colors can definitely reveal the every imperfection. So things like the silk PLAs, the kind of super bright, vibrant like reds, the oranges, the pinks, the lighter but more vibrant colors are often going to reveal more of those issues just because it's reflecting a ton of light and the light kind of bounces off everything. So if you have an imperfection, for example, if you have imperfect layer adhesion, then you have just an open spot of air where there is no material to reflect that light. So it kind of becomes a black hole and very obvious and kind of sticking out to the eye. So that's definitely why it's important to make sure that just because you have the same material, it's going to be a different finish, and making sure you tune all your filaments to exactly their filaments and not just a generic PLA profile. That way you make sure that you are going to have the best possible look for every kind of filament that you're using. And that's why you should test these new colors. If you get a brand new color in and you're testing it, if you get a brand new color in and you haven't tested it yet, I would definitely recommend just running the basic, temperature test, stringing tests, and then some finish tests with retraction, flow rate, things like that. And then just kind of write them down or keep it in your slicer profile. I know in Orca Slicer you can store tons of different filament profiles. I've seen people with hundreds of filament profiles that they create and store manually. So that is definitely something that you're going to want to do, especially if you're making stuff for other people and surface quality really matters. That is going to be where it's really important to test a brand new filament. I know, especially for me, if I'm meeting with a customer and we decide to go with a filament that I've never used before, I'm going to get an extra roll of that and just meticulously test it as much as I can to make sure that I have the most optimized settings to make sure that the customer gets the best looking print that they possibly can. And with that being said, that's kind of all I have for you guys today. I hope you guys were able to learn a little something, and now you're going to be able to kind of keep in the back of your head that just because it's the same filament brand and the same type of filament, the different colors, the different add-ons, whether it's glitter, silk, glow in the dark, things like that, it's going to change the overall quality and affect how your print looks. So that is definitely something that's very important to remember. But as always, I hope you guys enjoyed listening to today's episode, and I will talk to you guys next time.